Hi, Michelle. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Katie. Thanks for having me. I'm happy to
Oh,
be here.
thank you. Thank you for being here. I'm excited about this conversation. We talked a little bit before we hit record, and I just to let the audience know, you and I were in a podcasting course together. That's how we met.
Mhm.
And you were about to launch your own podcast starting in the new year, right?
Yeah, probably after sometime in the new year.
Sometime in the new year. Okay. So I want you to kind of introduce yourself to the audience in
Sure.
the sense of why you decided to start the podcast, what it's going to be about, what you're going to focus on, and what led you to that point of deciding
Yeah.
that this was something you needed and wanted to do in your life.
Yeah. So I have been in corporate America for 20 years and it has made me miserable. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's done a lot for me. Um, I'm successful. I have a beautiful roof over my head. I am able to provide for my daughters. But it triggers my anxiety like you wouldn't believe. And it always has. And I've always felt like I was an anxious person just ever since I was little. And so I thought it was just me. And no matter what career I would be in, it would just trigger me in different ways. But I had done some trauma healing work, childhood trauma healing work, last year in October. And after going through that experience, I realized I'm not an anxious person, but things are triggering my anxiety because my nervous system has been programmed to react to things that remind me of things that might have happened to me as a kid. And so that was very eye-opening for me. And over the summer, I want to say it was in July, I have an infrared sauna because I have chronic Lyme disease. So I was able to buy myself a sauna. And in the sauna, I started to, I listen to a lot of podcasts in the sauna, but I also get emails from Gabby Bernstein. I don't know if you know her. She's like a spiritual coach.
I do know her,
And
yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
she's great. And she's written all these books, The Universe Has Your Back, and I think other manifesting books. But I'm not a big meditator at all, like at all. But I got an email from her. It was like, try my spirit guide meditation. And I grew up Catholic. I'm not like super religious. When I grew up, I always had to go every week to church. But like for me, as an adult, I married somebody who isn't Catholic. Well, we're now since divorced, but so I didn't really go to church anymore, but I still have my own spiritual beliefs, kind of in my own way. And so I'm like, okay, I'm in the sauna. I'm like, why don't I try this? And this meditation was like trying to connect with your spirit guides. And not everybody believes in that stuff, but I've always been intrigued. So I do the spirit guide meditation and it kind of has you just like slow down and calm down and just breathe and listen to what's going on in your body and like what messages like or images or whatever pops in your mind, and it has you journal it out. But it's all under the guise of you're learning who your spirit guides are. They're telling you their name if they tell you, like in your mind, it could be an image. And again, not everybody believes in this stuff. I'm skeptical, whatever. So I do it and excuse me. I've always wanted to do a podcast, but I'm always like, I don't have time. I have this full-time job, a full-time career that has to take precedence. Just feels too overwhelming. So anyway, trying to make a long story short, something popped in my head to do the podcast. And ever since I did that spirit guide meditation, it just was nagging at me. I didn't tell anybody, but I was just like, do the podcast, do the podcast. So I see on Facebook, Kathy Heller and her free boot camp for podcasting. I'm like, that's weird. And so I'm like, it's free. So I don't even know who Kathy Heller is, but let's just sign up. So I signed up. And then of course, she's like, we have this 8-week long course to really do a deep dive into this stuff. And that's how you and I met. So I decided to sign up and I decided to do it. And I loved it. It's overwhelming at first, but if you break it down, I love it. And what I decided to do with my podcast is talk about how full-time working moms feel stuck, mostly in their career, but it really could be anywhere in their life. And so who I'm interviewing are people who have felt stuck in their life and how they've gotten out of it. And right now I'm focusing on people who were in corporate America or in some sort of soul-sucking career and were able to take the leap out of it to become happier people so they can align with their own purpose and values. And that's what I'm doing today for myself. I'm literally recording this or going to be launching a podcast where that's going to ultimately help me get out of my situation. Through the podcast course, I came across a woman named Kelsey Murphy, who also has a successful podcast, but she's also a career coach, I don't know if she's a life coach or a career coach, but she's evolved. Now she helps coaches create offerings and build their businesses. And so I signed up for her mastermind and I'm going through that now because I want to ultimately help women in my position who feel stuck in their career, are really unhappy, their career is not aligned with their purpose, values, or, really what they want to be doing and become happier. So part of that is, for me, I'm going to start with an offering around setting boundaries in life. And we'll go from there and see how it evolves.
Okay. Well, so I have to I don't know how to say this. We are very woo-woo on this podcast. So that whole spiritual guides thing.
Yes. I wasn't sure.
I am a self-described woo-woo. So that's, I think most people who are listening to this podcast, we are also fairly woo-woo. So the spirit guide thing is and the synchronicities, when you were talking, I was like, oh my God, synchronicity. So I just went to a spirit guides workshop through my yoga studio. It was put on, the yoga studio hosted it, but it was put on by someone in my area. She's called the Conscious Cultivator, and she does all kinds of workshops that are fantastic. So my daughter and I actually just went to that together, and that was pretty amazing. What else did you say that I was like, oh my gosh, I feel stuck in my career. So that was my motivation for starting this podcast as well. I'm a nurse and have been for almost 20 years now. And there are many parts of that. There are many parts of that I love, mostly my patient interaction, really like interacting with my patients and taking care of them. But I think that comes from my service heart. I'm very service oriented and have always been very service oriented. So, but I feel that right now at this stage of my life, my way of serving has to evolve. And so for years, my way of service was through my career as a nurse, but I've always felt like I was a coach at heart. And actually in my prior life, before I was a nurse, not my actual, earlier in my life, when I say prior life, I also believe in multiple lives. So I don't really mean that. I mean, this lifetime, prior to becoming a nurse, I was a teacher. And so, service, but never quite feeling like I was hitting the nail on the head, if you know what I mean. I was drawn to these service professions and there were components of them that I really enjoyed, but it just didn't feel quite like I had found the lock for my key. And then through lots of different things that I've talked about many times on the podcast that happened to me in my life, I went on a spiritual journey. And honestly, this podcast is about highlighting the journey, which is exactly what you are on, right? You were on this journey that started with, it started at birth, but you had an awakening last October when you did this thing, and then it has taken you on this new path that you're on. And that's what happened to me through several very difficult things that happened in my life. I was forced to wake up, essentially. I was forced to wake up and stop kind of living with my eyes closed, or living an okay life, or good enough, or what a good life should look like, or those types of things. I was forced to be no, I knew I had passions and dreams and ways of being in the world that were maybe not acceptable or profitable or whatever the word, whatever you want to say, but it was just, I kind of shoved them down and I hid them.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah. And then I was like, no more. No more.
Yeah.
Like, I am done hiding. I am done pretending to be something that I'm not. I am done feeling kind of dead inside and unfulfilled. I am done. I'm so done with it all. I think you and I are very, aligned on that.
It's so interesting that you say that. I was interviewing a woman for my podcast named Paula, and she said to me, and it just clicked. She's like, what you don't change, you choose.
Yeah.
And I'm like, wow.
It's always a choice, right?
Yeah. The fact that I keep staying in this soul-sucking career, I'm choosing it at this point because I'm not changing it. So that was eye-opening. I'm like, wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I'm so glad. I have to say to you before, sorry, I'm totally digressing, but I'm so glad to hear that you say that, like, this is the woo-woo crowd. I have to tell you something. It was because it just happened to me. So over the weekend, I went to a medium, and I've seen her, like, this is like the 5th year in a row. I see her I've done past life regression therapy. I've done, my angel readings. She finally, during the time of my podcasting and starting the course that I was doing, I went on her website. I don't know why I went on it, but I went on her website and saw that she offers coaching for people who are also gifted. And I always thought that I had some sort of gift, but I was scared of it. For certain reasons, certain things would happen to me. And so I went to her to my first class on Sunday, and she's like, Michele, you have a gift. And I'm like, oh my God, I do. It was unbelievable. I would love to tell you about it sometime. I'm not going to take all the time, but I'm so happy to hear you say that your crowd is my people.
Yes. I mean, and I totally believe in that. And I have also been to mediums many times, and often they just confirm what you already know. So last time I went to a medium, I was like, I feel like I should probably get certified in Reiki, because I have always felt like a strong, like, energetic, like, I can manipulate energy. And she was like, yep, you absolutely should. Like, she just, it was fascinating.
Cool. Like,
it's very
validation.
It's validation. And then that's like, we talk again on the show a lot about permission giving. And like, sometimes we seek that permission from someone on the outside when we really need to learn how to give ourselves the permission. And it's very hard for some reason. I don't know if that's harder for women. I feel like it is harder for women than men. To learn how to give ourselves permission to do what we know. We already know. We know it. Why are we waiting? And that's this, that's where it came to here with starting this podcast and, going on this journey. I already knew all this stuff, but it was like I was waiting for someone to give me permission to do it. And then I finally reached a point where I was like, what am I doing? This is my life. This is my life. No one gets to give me permission except for me. And if I don't give it to myself, if I wait for someone to give it to me, I could be waiting until I die. And also, why would someone else's opinion ever be more important than my own?
It's so easy for us. I mean, and I feel like as women, especially, we've been conditioned to kind of suppress ourselves and just be people pleasers. And if somebody doesn't like it, you're like, oh, okay, then I'll do something else, or I won't put myself in the spotlight. And well, I'm glad you're doing this podcast, because that needs to change.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It absolutely does. We also did. So I can't hear you.
Sorry.
Oh, yeah. We also did. That's totally fine. My audience is also used to that. I don't really edit my podcasts unless like something really bad happens. So they're used to it. So also when you said that, you said I did some healing around some childhood trauma. We've had an episode, which actually was one of our more popular episodes, on somatic healing. And the powers of somatic healing and healing things like childhood trauma. So many alignments is what I'm saying with your story. Now, going back to you feel like you were triggered because things in your life were happening that were reminding you of your childhood trauma. And then you realized kind of like any job I would get into was going to trigger me, because it wasn't really the job. It was this being reminded of these things triggers that had happened.
Yeah. Right? But I didn't recognize that I didn't really realize I had tons of childhood trauma. I just I didn't even know what was triggering my anxiety, but I later learned, oh, that's why, like the reason behind, like, I now need to understand if I'm anxious about something, I need to kind of take a step back and be like, why am I so anxious about this? Or like, what is it about this that's bothering me? And then I'm able to kind of like correlate it with like a memory, or, oh, it's because when I was a kid, this happened and my body is kind of alarming me like I'm unsafe when I'm really not unsafe.
Yeah.
So I literally am reprogramming my nervous system, and kind of reparenting myself. Michele, you're safe. You're gonna be okay. There were a lot of things, I always had to be good and perfect when I was a kid. I was kind of a parentified child, if you will. And I think a lot of those things, especially with work, where, if my work isn't perfect, I'm like, oh my God, I'm gonna get fired. Oh my God, like, or, if my boss puts 30 minutes impromptu on my calendar, I'm like, oh my God, am I in trouble?
Yeah.
And it's like, I need to really sit back and be like, why am I feeling that way? And it's like, oh, because when I was a kid, my teachers would, be mad at me if I was late, or like whatever, it could be anything. I mean, I have bigger trauma than just teachers being mad if I was late, but just as an example. But it's crazy. And like when I get in a fight with somebody or there's conflict, depending on how I react, I know how old I am in my body. So like, oh, that's 5-year-old Michele, or that's the teenager in me because I'm being combative,
Right. And did you do a lot of therapy to figure this out? Because that takes a lot of ability to self-reflect, and get distance.
Yeah. So, I'm divorced now, so I'm a single mom, but my boyfriend and I have been together for about 3.5 years, and we were having a hard time communicating. So we've been going to therapy a little bit, and part of the certain things that like he would react, like we would tell her what was going on, and certain things that he would react to would be like, she would be like, that's a trauma trigger, or a trauma response. I'm like, what's a trauma response? And so she encouraged him to do this men's intensive where they spend a weekend. It's like 4 or 5 men with a trauma therapist, and they literally unpack all their childhood trauma, one by one, day by day. And it was so transformational for him. And when he came back, it was like he was a different person. I mean, don't get me wrong, he's not perfect. And there's certainly, he's still working through it. I mean, he has a lot of trauma, or had a lot of trauma, but then I was like, the therapist was like, Michele, you can do it too. And there's one she recommended to me. So I went to it, and it was me and 2 other women, and it unpacked all of our childhood trauma. And I was like, oh my God, I didn't realize. I always thought like, because my parents are divorced, my mom and her now husband, she left my dad for him, and they had a very volatile relationship for a very long time. So that led to a lot of trauma for me, and it was literally being unpacked. And I now realize why I react to my mom the way I react to her now, because she's a trigger for me. And so I really need to, I've had to work through that too. And so, yes, I've been in a lot of therapy. I've been in what is it? CBT, whatever it's called.
Behavioral therapy.
Cognitive behavioral therapy didn't really work for me. And so the woman who did the session, the women's intensive weekend, is now my therapist, and she's amazing. She wrote a book called Gifts from a Challenging Childhood. Her name's Jan Bergstrom. She's fabulous. I highly recommend the book for anybody who wants to learn about, why I am good in my job is because of the gifts I've been given from the challenging childhood I had. But it's also not so much a gift because of the way I react to certain things could be better, but it's because of my traumas and how my nervous system has been programmed. And so I'm literally deprogramming it. And it's taken a long time. It's been about a year. I'm still a work in progress. I will always be a work in progress, but to answer your question, yes, lots of therapy.
Well, that's amazing though. I mean, it's helping you get to where you need to be, which is fantastic. I'm a full proponent of therapy as well. And my listeners know that too, because we've had therapists on the show, and my daughter's been through tons of therapy. My son's been in therapy. Like we are very pro therapy, because it really can help you get the space you need to see stuff that's really hard to see, because when you're triggered, you really can't see it. You like actually can't see it. Your brain, that part of your brain that would allow you to see why you are feeling the way that you're feeling and what really the cause is, actually shuts down. It actually goes offline. So you can't, in that moment, there's no way for someone to be like, this is why I'm feeling like this, unless you can unpack that outside of that moment.
Yeah. And that's why I started doing some meditation, because I'm like, something's got to give. I can't be living in this like reactive state. And I'm like, I can't seem to make decisions. I'm so stuck. And the fact that I'm just so anxious all the time, it's not letting me make clear decisions or take clear action. And so these meditations calm me down. And honestly, it gives me clarity.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way I never thought I would have. So it's kind of changed my life.
So have you become, earlier you said, I'm not really a big meditator, but are you now more of a meditator?
Yeah. Every time I get in the sauna.
Okay. Every time you get in the sauna.
Literally, I do that spirit guide meditation because, it's hard to find free meditations out there that you like. Either the music's off or the voice is weird, but I really like Gabby Bernstein. She does have, paid meditations, but I don't do that right now, at least right now.
I'm sorry to interrupt you. That was the other synchronicity. Literally, before we got onto this call, I purchased her 21-day manifestation little program. Yes.
For like $37 or whatever.
Yes. And I'm doing it with a friend at work. We're like doing it together.
You are? Yes. I was thinking about that. I'm like, it's only $37 or whatever. It's cheap for, compared to everything else she does. She's got this membership too, like this Gabby coaching membership. I'm like, I'm not paying that, but
right. I know. I was like, let me just give this a shot, because I've done so much work, like spiritual work. I'm a yoga teacher and I meditate. I'm a religious meditator, and I do also tons of breath work and journaling, and I mean all the things. But I've really never focused on manifestation. It's just never been something that I paid that much attention to, and ever. So I'm like, let's dip my toe into this. And that has how I have evolved my practices over the years, is that same way. Like every time something new kind of comes into my orbit that I'm curious about, I'm like, let's check this out. Let's see if it's for me. And it's always what I encourage my listeners to do as well. It's like, take what works for you and leave what doesn't. Like, just because somebody recommends it doesn't mean it's the right choice for you. So I could take this 21-day course and be like, that's amazing, I'm going to do more of that. Or I could take it and be like, that was all right, that wasn't really for me. And you'll find other, like, it's not that I don't believe in manifestation, I totally do, but the way somebody presents it might be more in line with how I can receive it.
It may not resonate.
Or may, who knows? Exactly. So anyway, that is so funny.
That is funny.
So going back, so having, now you're identifying, I have these things that happened in my childhood. They are definitely impacting my present reality and my relationships and my work and all that kind of stuff. Which is amazing, right? It's amazing to like have the gift of knowing what's going on with yourself and then being able to take steps to improve it. So how do you think this was showing up? You talked a little bit about how it was showing up in your job. How is it showing up in your parenting or with your husband?
Yeah, good question.
Do you think that had any impact on it leading to you guys not being together?
You know what? In my marriage, I don't know if my childhood trauma led to our divorce, but I do think it led to our getting married. Because, and somebody else asked me this, do you think you got divorced because of your childhood trauma? I'm like, no, I think I got married because of it. And it was like a aha moment. my ex-husband, we're still very close. He lives at the end of my street. We're very amicable. I'm very lucky. And it's so easy for my girls that we live so close to each other.
Yeah.
But I married my best friend. And I have 3 brothers. I didn't really need another one. But I married him because he was safe, funny, just easygoing and no drama. And my life growing up was so like anxiety ridden for so many reasons. And I needed that kind of presence in my life. I needed somebody like him. And that's why I married him. During our marriage, I mean, we didn't fight a lot. When we did fight, it was, quick, or, we'd fight and then like we wouldn't even apologize. We just get over it, But I think with my divorce, I just realized that there were other things in a marriage that I needed. And I know that there were other things in a marriage that he needed. I think he would have stayed in the marriage for the long haul, that's the kind of guy he is. I just was going through a lot of therapy. And again, there was like this nagging thing. Like, I'm a true believer that the universe will continue to throw the same problems at you until you actually deal with them. If you don't deal with them, it's still going to present itself. And even the next time, it'll present itself stronger. And that's what was happening to me. And so I had to deal with that. And I did. And it was the hardest decision I've ever had to make. And sometimes I think I'm always going to grieve that, because we had a good marriage. It wasn't like it was a bad marriage. It's not like I cheated or he cheated. It was just, there was something missing and I needed to listen to that. And I always said to myself, especially, I would never want to put my girls through what I went through as a kid, because my brothers and I, we had divorced parents. They lived 45 minutes away from each other. They hated each other. Holidays were miserable because we'd have to go to this parent's house, then drive 45 minutes to this parent's house, and then 45 minutes again, like back and forth, back and forth. And I didn't want to put my kids through that. So that's another reason why I married him, because he was safe. But now it's like, oh my God, I'm putting my kids through the same thing that I went through. I'm actually doing this. Like, what am I doing? But it didn't have to be the same way that, my parents did it. And so luckily we both respect each other. We both love each other, just in a different way. So.
Yeah, I think that's amazing that you recognize that, and divorce doesn't have to be, I know, it's always hard, but it can be done well. And
it can be.
It sounds like you guys are doing it well, and that
it's not easy. Yeah.
I'm sure it's not. It's not, but your girls are very lucky that you're both committed to that. Yeah.
But there are people who are married to narcissists, and like, I can't imagine what they go through. Like, it's not like it's, I don't want to discount what other people go through in their marriages or divorces, because if somebody cheats, it's really hard to get over that, and how, you can forgive somebody, but you can still have resentment towards them. And it's like, we're very lucky in that sense. And I just acknowledge that not everybody can have what we have.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And how about in your parenting? Because I think for myself, when I became, so I had, everybody has a little bit of trauma, or no one gets to childhood without some degree of trauma, right? So it's a huge scale of how much trauma, but I don't think anybody gets through without any trauma. And I had a certain amount of trauma in my own childhood that probably at the time I didn't even recognize as trauma, didn't see it as trauma. Then I kind of like forgot about it. And I'm using air quotes because you don't really ever forget about it, but it wasn't something I was thinking about in my conscious mind on a regular basis. Got married, had my children, and there was something in the raising of children that really brought a lot of that stuff up that was buried. And I didn't even know that it was buried until I started raising my own children and having to make all the tough decisions you have to make about how to raise them and how to discipline them and how to guide them. And, what is right and wrong. I don't really like that terminology, but right or wrong for your child and your family, like what will work best and what won't, and how to parent together with your partner. I mean, my husband and I were together for 12 years before we had a child. So we had a certain dynamic that of course gets completely thrown off kilter once you add a baby into the mix. So there was a lot of stuff that came up once I had a child. And did you notice that for yourself?
Yes, big time. Especially more recently, but I yell a lot. I get very, very anxious. So, and I still yell a lot. I need to get much better at that. But yes, I mean, when the girls were really little, they're 10 and 7 now, but when they were really little, the temper tantrums and stuff, like I try not to let that bother me as much because they're little. And it's like, you get all these parenting tips from other mom groups on Facebook, or, the mom groups that you go with your babies to get, you just commiserate together and you just kind of ignore it, and not ignore it, but you just let them have it, and it's like, you just have to take a deep breath. But as they got older and more defiant and knew how to push my buttons, like that's where I saw it come out a lot more, where I would be so anxious, I would yell. And that is not the mom I want to be, because especially the way I grew up, my mom and I had a very combative relationship for many different reasons. And I think along the way, there were times where I lost a little bit of respect for her as I was growing up, because of the decisions that she was making for her own life. And so there was a lot of arguing. And there still is at times. It's better now that I've like done some self, healing and work. But I think with my kids, especially with my 10-year-old, she's a tween. She's going to be going through changes, and she's going to speak up more. And I'm not reacting as well to that as I should be. And I feel like I'm causing some trauma in her life, not even on purpose. It's like, how is my yelling going to affect her now? She hates it when I yell. They both hate it when I yell. But like, when I ask them 5 times to do something and they don't do it, like what gets their attention? I don't know what else to do. So it's like, those are things that definitely show up and still show up, where I really need to take the advice that I've been given from all of this work, take a step back and just like take 10 seconds and breathe. It's like my nervous system is on overdrive when I'm so frustrated. But that's where I find it showing up more. And, especially as the girls get older.
Yeah.
I see a lot of myself in them when I was growing up, and I'm like, oh, karma.
Yeah. I hear a lot of parents say that. But I feel like, that's our opportunity for growth. That's our opportunity to do better than our parents did. And I never want to ever blame like parents, because everybody's just doing the best that they can in the moment, right? Everyone is, I firmly believe that in any given moment, even if it's not your proudest moment, when you look back on it, you were still doing the best you could in that moment.
Yeah. And I agree with that.
But then after the moment, and you reflect and you can say, you know what, that I want to make a different choice next time. And so I'm gonna, try these different things to improve my parenting and heal myself along with healing my child. And so it's always a journey. It's always learning and growth. So I don't ever want anyone to like blame themselves or blame their parents. I try to emphasize that, because we do talk a lot about like things our parents did when we were younger that were maybe not the best. And I don't ever want that to come off as, just blaming and shaming our parents, which is not helpful, because again, they were doing the best that they could. And now we're doing the best that we can. And I'm always joking and saying like, oh, I wonder what thing my kid's going to be on the therapy couch for that I did, and they're be like, my mom.
I think that all the time.
I know. But
like, it's funny. Sorry to interrupt you. My boyfriend, I took my girls out to dinner, just the 3 of us, a couple days ago. Over the weekend, I think. And we were talking about my ex-husband's dating somebody new, and they were like, I really like her. And my oldest was like, it's so much easier for me to get along with the girls, the women, than it is, Tom. And I'm like, do you think though that it would be somebody else? If it were somebody else and not Tom, then, you'd still have it doesn't matter who it is. It's just, I have a harder time with the boys. I'm like, okay, I get that. And I'm like, but do you like Tom? She's like, well, you fight all the time. I'm like, what? No. Yes, mom. And I'm like, oh boy. So I'm like, but is it me that starts it or Tom? She's like, definitely you. And I'm like, oh God, like, what am I like? Then I'm like going back to my childhood. I'm like, am I traumatizing my girls because I give Tom a hard time in front of them? Or, so like those are things that I have to work on. And I'm like, there's another thing like that I'm doing, and it's obvious to them.
Yeah.
That is caught. Like, what am I doing? What damage am I doing? I don't want them to see like what a bad relationship is. Like and it's not a bad relationship. I'm not saying that, but it's like, I don't want them to be like, it's, think it's okay to be fighting all the time. I don't want that. Like, we don't fight all the time in front of them, but something is getting her to tell me that.
Yeah. So it's which like, also kids are so, they're little mirrors. I mean, and they really like hold that mirror up to your face and you're like,
totally.
Totally. Put the mirror down.
Oh my God.
I want to see that.
Totally. Oh my God. That's so good.
But there we go. There's your, you can be like, I'm going to like block the mirror and not look at it. Or you can say, oh shoot. Well, thank you for showing me that. And that's a real eye opener. And what do I want to do about it moving forward? And I say all the time on the show how my kids are my spiritual teachers. Like they were sent down here to help me grow as much as I'm, here to help them learn and grow. They are here to help me learn and grow.
Oh my God. That is so true.
It's
so true.
It is so true. If you allow it, because sometimes I think that old fashioned form of parenting is kind of like, do as I say, not as I do. I'm right. You're wrong. You're the kid. I'm the adult. But if you're, that's how I was raised. But me too. But if you're open to it, there are such gifts in their brutal honesty. Yes.
Yeah, I knew what you were going to say, especially the 7-year-old. Oh my God. The things that come out of her mouth. Oh my God.
I know.
It's crazy.
Some of them I'm like, all right, when they were little, I'm like, okay, you don't need to be that honest. When they're like, your belly's flappy. I'm like, oh my God. Okay. We don't, that's too much. Yeah.
Oh my God. It's so funny. Oh my God. I love that you just said that. So they changed my name on the Alexa. I don't want my Alexa to go off, but they changed my name on it to Jiggly Panda Bum. Because I have a jiggly butt.
Yep.
And so every time I'm like, Alexa, what's the weather? Good morning, Jiggly Panda Bum. I'm like, oh my God, how do I change this back?
Yes, and they know how to change it. You're like, oh my God, I don't know how to do this. These kids and their technological knowledge.
I don't know how to do this. I know. So funny.
Oh yes. My rear end is a constant topic of conversation as well. I've always had a larger rear end, and they think it's hysterical. And it's a whole thing. It's a whole thing.
Oh man,
yeah,
I know.
So certain things, I'm like, okay, I'm doing the best I can there. I'm 45. Give me a break.
Yeah.
But
seriously,
many things that I'm like, oh wow, okay. Okay. I've got to do something about that. And I think it's also a beautiful gift because yes, they might show you this reflection of yourself that you're not so thrilled with. But if they see you go on a journey to change that and improve yourself, like what a gift is that to them?
I know.
Right? What a gift to say like, mom did the work and became a better version of herself. And so they're going to come up in their lives in moments. They're going to have, this is all a cycle, right? That's what I say all the time. I joke about my kids on the therapy couch, but they're going to have kids, theoretically speaking, and they're going to put them on the couch, right? Because we're all imperfect humans walking around trying to do the best that we can. Mm-hmm. And if they see like, oh, mom did this, she was struggling and she saw it and she did the work and she improved herself. And I'm so grateful she did because we had a better relationship or we had a more peaceful home or whatever, whatever the benefit of that growth was. then when they're struggling, they're going to be like, yeah, I can do that too. Mom did it and I can do it too. And that's really like a big passion project of this podcast is mom's self-improvement. Because when we improve ourselves, we improve the lives of our children and we show them what's possible. And I don't know if there's a better gift a mother can give their children by other than showing them what's possible in this life.
Yeah. And I agree with that. And it's interesting too. My daughter, my older daughter, my 10-year-old, she, you know, her and her sister would be fighting. They fight all the time. Oh my God. And, you know, I'll try to break it up somehow. It's like, Maddie, don't do this, or Piper, do that, or like, you need to apologize to each other. And then I see Maddie, my older one, being like, you know, you're always taking Piper's side. You're never on my side, or whatever. And I recognize that she says that, and I don't believe that to be true, but obviously something in her makes her feel that way. And so it then takes me back to my childhood and when I didn't feel heard and when I didn't feel understood. And I'm like, how do I parent in a different way than my parents did to make her not feel that way?
Yeah.
You know, and I don't know the answer, but at least I recognize it, and it's an opportunity for me to think about how to approach things differently. I don't know, but
I think that's a really important distinction. I'm glad that you said that, because we're talking about like the kids holding up the mirror, and sometimes they hold it up and you know what they're saying is true. Like in your heart, you like that hits right in the center of my chest and my gut. And I'm like, I knew that all along. I was trying to not know it, but I definitely, that this rings so true. And sometimes it doesn't. Like in your case here, you're like, I don't think that that's true. But also what a brilliant parenting move to say, well, I don't see that, but I understand that that's her perception of what's happening and that's her reality. And how can I like help her to feel seen and heard? So you don't always have to take on the weight of what your child says to you as being 100% true, but it's true for her. So, and I think that's amazing. I mean, you're able to see that, make that distinction and say, like, even if you don't know the answer yet, right? I mean, we don't always know what the answers are. That's a whole separate.
Well, that's also part of my trauma healing. It's like, okay, I can react to this and like be combative and be like, that's not true. I can't believe you said that. Or I can say, well, what makes you feel that way?
Right.
Why do you feel that way? And that's the lesson in it. And that's, you know, me growing. And hopefully helping her, you know, not have the same trauma that I did, at least in some small aspect, but it's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, it's always a work in progress, and it's always the blurred lines of parenthood. What's right, what's the best, you know, course of action, what is going to, you know, help her grow the most or damage the least. It's, you know, it's the struggle all of us are on all the time.
It is. It is, but we're a work in progress.
We are a work in progress. You know? Absolutely. All right. Well, I want to get to, before we have to get off, because it's getting a little bit late, I want to get to your work on boundaries, because I think this is a really important topic when we're talking about how we improve our lives, especially as women, getting unstuck, you know, living a life of passion and purpose. I think boundaries are a really big component of that. So talk a little bit about that work.
Yeah. So when I was going through my women's intensive and the trauma healing, a lot of boundary discussions came up, limits and boundaries. And a lot of people think that boundaries are just constantly saying no, causing conflict. I don't believe that to be true. I believe that boundaries are a way for you to say yes to the things that you value, to yes to your purpose, yes to your self-work, to then align more with, you know, being a better mom, a better partner, a better friend, less resentful. So essentially when I was, you know, this was more recently, again, in the summertime, probably around the same time I want to do my podcast, I took on some extra stuff at work voluntarily because the team was struggling, and I'm in the meetings and events field. So the service driven field. And that's what I want to have a purpose of serving people, but not in the way that I'm doing it at work. So anyway, excuse me, I took on more work. I was definitely being taken advantage of. I was definitely in a very toxic environment. It was just really bad. Finally, after about like 6 weeks of this, I'm like, no, I'm not going to be taken advantage of. You're not going to treat me this way. I'm not going to work till 9 or 10 o'clock at night, helping get this team back up to where they were, like in a thankless situation. It's not going to happen. So I finally was like, you know what? It's 5 o'clock. I don't care what's done and what's not done. The client can be screaming because something's not done. I am logging off.
Mhm.
That's a boundary for me. But not just that, there are other boundaries that you can't see that are really, really important to set. And, you know, there's all these different boundaries. There's physical boundaries, like sexual boundaries. There's, you know, relationships where, you know, you only take up to a certain amount, but there's also boundaries within yourself. And I call those containing boundaries. And so like to the point of like, when you're in an argument with somebody and you're so angry and you just want to lash out, you need to set a containing boundary for yourself where you don't show up in a way you don't want to, that you'll regret later. So, you know, screaming at someone, I hate you, you're a jerk, or whatever it is, it's containing that and having that internal boundary so you can show up no matter how they're showing up for you. You can show up in a way that you are proud of. So that's one boundary. Another boundary is a protective boundary. Again, something you can't see, where somebody is saying something like my daughter, like that's true for them, but you know it's not true for you. And I hate this talk of like, there are certain things that are black and white. Like, yes, the sky is blue. Yes, you know, like that's truth. Like that's a fact. But people's perceptions are, again, their reality. And so they say something to me like, I don't know, I'm trying to think of something. Like my daughter, let's use that example. You always take her side. You're so mean to me, this and that. I know that that's not true. And so my protective boundary is only allowing something in if it's true for me, and letting everything else go, not letting it bother me. And it's very hard to do. Because if you let it in, it's like a porous boundary to let that in, and then it doesn't allow your containing boundary to remain, you know. And it also doesn't allow you to be empathetic and compassionate to how the other person's feeling, because obviously they're hurting in some way for them to say things like that. And so it's okay for them to feel that way. You know, it's not true. So how can you show up in a compassionate, empathetic way to make them feel seen and heard, but not allow it to bother you or affect your self-worth because you know it's not true for you? It's very hard to do. It takes a lot of work. I still have to do that work literally every day. But once you can kind of understand that concept and understand how to do it, it gets easier.
Yeah. Yeah. I've had to do
a
lot of that work as well. And it is really hard, but you're right. It does get easier. You learn how to release what isn't yours to hold, and be able to still be compassionate towards the other person and their perspective. Right. Yeah.
And but like they could be projecting on you, but that's on them. And you need to understand, like, that's their issue. It's not you. You're not doing this. It's, you know, maybe it's something in their childhood trauma. Right. That's coming out, you know, and it's hard to recognize, but when you do recognize it, and it's not something where you show up and you say, well, that's yours. You're projecting. This is your trauma, not mine. Like, that's not compassionate, you know? But it's, you know, that's obviously, like, when I react that way, because sometimes I do, that's my wounded child coming out. Yeah. Also, you know, my combative, like, you know? Yeah. So it's a lot of work, and it's a journey. It is not, there's no destination to it. It's a lifelong work.
It is. It's lifelong work. And I think this is where a lot of family, difficult family dynamics come in, because it's much harder to create those boundaries with people that you're close to, in my experience. Like I can
100%.
Yeah. People outside of my close friends and family, that's not that hard for me personally to set that boundary. But when it comes to people who are super close to me, it took me many, many years and many fights and feeling guilty and carrying the weight of things that weren't mine to carry. And, just a lot of learning to let go and shed all of that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Like at work, if somebody lashes out at me, it happens a lot. Like I'm just sitting there. I don't even have to react. It's like, holy cow, you've got a lot of work to do and you don't even know it,
Yes. And you cannot even see it yet. Yeah. You're blind to it right now.
Yeah. But I see it and I'm not going to let that in.
Right.
You can yell at me all you want, but that's inappropriate and I'm not going to react.
Yeah.
But to your point, I mean, with family and people that are closest to me, it is next to impossible sometimes because they know how to push your buttons. You know how to push theirs. And it's just been, you've known these people for your whole life if they're family. And it's like, it's hard to get out of that same swirl that you've always been in, so that's where the work comes in. It's tough.
Yeah. And with your children, you love them, like your daughter, you love your daughter. You don't want her to feel that way. You want to feel like you're a good mom, or she sees you as a good mom, or, all these stories that we tell ourselves. And so then it's like you get into the fix it mode. Like, how do I fix this? How do I fix this?
Yeah.
Sometimes it's just not yours to fix.
I know. Yeah. And I agree. But I also need to show up better than I do sometimes.
Yeah. It's that balance.
Yeah. Yeah. It's hard.
It really is. It really is. But that's why we have these conversations, because everyone is experiencing this in their own way, in their own families and friends and lives. And they think that they're alone, and they're not, because this is the common human experience. So yeah. I think it's great that, you share that, and people will really see themselves in your story and feel like, okay,
yeah, I hope so.
It's okay.
Okay. Yeah, it is.
Yep. Well, thank you so much for being here today.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Oh, you are so welcome. Tell us the name of your podcast.
It's called The Betterment Podcast.
Okay. And coming out sometime early 2024.
Yeah. If I don't, I'm going to I've recorded a lot of episodes. I need to clean them up, add stuff to it. I probably won't get to it between now and the end of the year. I'm going to try, but if not, it'll definitely be coming out early 2024. Okay, great. Well, I'm super interested to listen to women who have been successful at transitioning out of their soul-sucking careers into something that they enjoy more. Yes. Well, I want you on my podcast. Okay. Yes. I will be there. I will be there. Yeah. Good. I can't wait. And I really appreciate this. I love what you do. What you're doing for moms and women. And I think it's going to go a really long way. So I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me. Thank you. And I'll let you know how my manifesting challenge went. Yes. Will you? I will. I'm like, maybe I'll sign up. Maybe you, seriously, I think you've inspired me. Manifest together. Yeah. We'll be out of our careers in no time, Katie. That's right. That's right. All right. Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Take care. You too. Bye-bye. Bye.